They'd set a folding chair for me by the mudroom, the kind you borrow from a church basement, the kind that hums a little metallic note when you sit down. I told them it was fine. Truth is, I've sat on worse. Before we continue, make sure to hit the like button. Also, tell us in the comments, what time is it where you are right now and which city are you watching from? I love seeing how far our stories travel. The smell of new paint and lemon polish hung thick in the air. My son's housewarming, their first real party since the move. From where I sat, I could see the hallway pulsing with guests, shoes still on, voices warm and quick. The laughter carried easy, bouncing off the marble entry and that gleaming white runner his wife had laid out for photos. Every few minutes someone would glance my way and smile. Polite, brief, the kind of smile people use when they're making sure the old man's still breathing but not about to start a story. I'd lift a hand and wave back, slow, so I wouldn't spill the drink balanced on my knee. The drink was ginger ale. She'd handed it to me herself, my daughter-in-law, with the careful distance of someone passing a candle in the wind. It's non-alcoholic, she said, just to keep things easy. She didn't mean harm, not really. But in her eyes I saw the little tremor that comes from pity dressed as manners. They'd been doing well, those two. New house, new furniture, new friends, all polished like the floorboards that creaked when no one else was talking. I'd told them I'd gone bankrupt a few months back, that the last of my savings were gone after I closed the workshop and the taxes came due. I said it plain, even threw in a sigh for realism. What I didn't tell them was that every cent had already been moved into a trust, quietly, legally, purposefully. But tonight wasn't about that. Tonight I just wanted to watch. From my little corner I watched them glide from guest to guest, her dress glinting under the pendant lights, his shirt cuffs just so. My son had his mother's posture, shoulders straight even when tired. Sometimes that small resemblance hits me so hard I forget to breathe. "Dad," he said when he first brought me in, "we'll keep you near the mudroom, okay? It's quieter, and you can rest whenever you want." I nodded. Rest, the universal code for stay out of the way. He'd gone back to greeting people, and I'd stayed here between the smell of shoe polish and the faint chill sneaking in from the back door. My chest felt tight, not from anger. Just that slow compression you get when something once wide has been folded too many times. A little boy darted past me, nearly knocking over my glass. His mother chased after him, smiled my way. "Sorry about that, sir." I told her it was fine. Always fine. The wooden chest sat beside me on the floor, wrapped in brown paper and tied with rough twine. It wasn't much to look at, just a carpenter's handiwork. No varnish, corners mitered clean. Inside were letters, each one written months ago in my trailer behind the workshop. Some were for people in this very room, though they didn't know it yet. Each letter carried a name, a promise, and a truth too heavy to speak tonight. "Carlos," a neighbor said, stopping by with a plate of appetizers. "You good here?" I smiled. "Better than most." He laughed and moved on. I could hear my daughter-in-law's voice from the kitchen, bright and orchestrated. "Don't mention money, okay?" she told someone near the sink. "He's sensitive about it." The word sensitive clanged in my chest like a nail hitting concrete. I looked down at my hands. Years of splinters had turned them into a map of small, pale scars. My fingers still knew the weight of a hammer even when holding a glass. I flexed them slowly. People think strength leaves with age, but it doesn't. It just hides beneath slower gestures. Dinner was served on staggered waves, buffet style. They called tables 1 through 4. I wasn't on any table. I was extra. My daughter-in-law noticed me still seated and said softly, "Oh, Dad, we'll fix you a plate once everyone's settled." A small pause, then the smile again. I didn't forget you. I said, I know. The line to the food stretched through the hallway. From my chair I could smell roasted chicken, garlic bread, the butter glaze they'd bragged about earlier. My stomach didn't complain. Hunger wasn't new to me. Waiting was older still. A few guests glanced toward me and whispered, the kind of whisper that wears perfume. One of them said, "That's his father, right? Poor thing, I heard he lost everything." Another voice, lower, quick, "At least they're helping him. I'd go crazy living in a trailer." I took another sip of ginger ale and let the carbonation burn my throat. The fizz covered the silence. Time moved like thick syrup. Somewhere between the salad course and dessert, a man I'd never met, maybe one of my son's colleagues, stopped beside me. "You the builder?" he asked. "Was," I said. "Now I just fix what's still worth fixing." He grinned. "Beautiful house your son's got. Must have had a good teacher." "Maybe," I said. "Wood remembers its maker even when people forget." He blinked, unsure if that was wisdom or warning, then wandered back toward the music. Later, when the laughter rose again, I thought about my trailer. The walls are thin there, and every night you can hear coyotes testing their distance from town. I like it that way. Keeps me honest. In the morning, the light hits my workbench through the small east window, and I can almost hear her, my wife, telling me not to forget my lunch again. Some habits stay loyal long after their reason is gone. A flash from across the room pulled me back. My daughter-in-law was taking photos by the fireplace, posing with guests, holding her wine at the perfect tilt. My son stood beside her, one arm looped loosely around her waist, his smile the kind you practice in front of mirrors. When she turned to him, I caught a glimpse of something small, a tightening at the corners of her mouth, the kind that comes when effort begins to outpace affection. I wondered if she noticed me watching. She walked over not long after, heels clicking. "Dad," she said, brushing invisible dust off her sleeve, "could you just make sure the chest doesn't get misplaced? We're doing gifts later." "I'll guard it," I said. "Perfect." Her tone softened. "And thank you for understanding about the table thing. We just didn't have enough seats that matched." "Of course," I said. "Wouldn't want to break the symmetry." She smiled, small, uncertain, and walked back toward the light. The neighbor who'd spoken to me earlier came by again. "Want me to grab you a plate now?" he asked. I shook my head. "Maybe later." He lingered. "You built half this town, Carlos. Don't let them forget that." "I won't," I said, though I meant something else entirely. The chest at my feet seemed heavier now, not from weight, from meaning. Inside were words waiting for the right silence. I ran a thumb over the twine. When the music swelled again, I closed my eyes and pictured the first beam I ever raised by hand. Raw pine, rain slick, heavy as hope. My wife had been there that day, holding the level, laughing when the nail bent. I could still see her hair stuck to her cheek from the wind. The memory settled over me like a coat. A new guest stumbled in from the porch and nearly tripped over my chair. "Oh, sorry, sir, didn't see you there." That line, more than any, cut through. "Didn't see you there." That's how it happens, I thought. First invisibility, then assumption, then silence. But the night wasn't over yet. The real noise hadn't started. For now, I waited, the way a beam waits beneath the floor, unseen but holding weight all the same. And when the time came, when the last toast was raised and the lights dimmed to that warm, false gold, the chest would open. But not yet. Tonight I would sit quietly by the mudroom where they said it was quieter and watch what people do when they think the old man's asleep. Morning light in the trailer comes slow, filtered through thin curtains that don't quite meet in the middle. It crawls across the countertop over the small coffee pot and lands finally on the workbench. The only thing that still feels like home. The bench holds more memory than wood now. Each dent, each stain carries a story my hands remember even when my mind forgets. I'd slept little after the housewarming. Too many faces, too many words said with teeth showing but hearts turned away. I could still hear her voice, my daughter-in-law, echoing faintly. Don't mention money. It had stuck to me like sawdust on damp skin. I poured coffee into the same chipped mug I'd used for years. The one she gave me, my wife, back when mornings still smelled of her perfume and fresh toast. The handle was cracked, but I'd glued it myself twice. Things don't last by chance. They last because someone keeps fixing them. Outside, the wind pushed through the pine trees that surrounded the trailer park. The air carried that sharp, clean scent of winter coming too early. I opened the door and stepped out barefoot, letting the cold boards wake me up properly. Somewhere in the distance, a hammer struck rhythmically against something metal. I smiled. Another soul trying to build something that stays. That was the day I decided to write it all down. Every reason, every secret. I wasn't proud of the lie I told about being broke, but pride and honesty don't always share the same table. Sometimes you have to choose which one keeps the roof up. The lie started one evening 3 months after she passed. I was still in the old house then. The silence had weight, the kind that presses against your ribs. I'd walk through each room and hear echoes of her humming. The house had become a museum for sounds that used to mean life. Bills kept arriving, though. The phone stopped ringing except for debt collectors and realtors asking if I was considering selling while the market's hot. One night I sat at the kitchen table with her old recipe box beside me. I'd been eating cereal for dinner for a week. I reached inside that box not for food, but for a note she'd left the year she was sick. A short one, written in her rounded, patient handwriting. Don't let money become the only thing they hear from you. That line changed everything. I didn't want my children to listen to me because of what I owned. I wanted them to see me, the man underneath the calluses and the retirement checks. So I started imagining what would happen if I had nothing. If all they could offer me was love. Would they? The next day I told my son that I'd lost most of my savings. He was kind about it. Shocked maybe, but kind. The tone changed after a few weeks. Phone calls got shorter, invitations fewer. I became the subject of concern, not companionship. So I leaned into it, told them I'd sold the workshop to pay back taxes, told them I'd moved into a trailer to cut costs. What I didn't tell them was that I'd moved the money into a private trust managed by an old friend, a retired notary who owed me a favor from back in the union days. The trust wasn't for me. It was for the town. I'd been part of a group trying to start a maker co-op, a place for kids who couldn't afford college but had hands built for building. A place to learn woodwork, metalwork, maybe even coding one day. I'd already bought the empty feed store on Main Street, just hadn't told anyone yet. All I needed was time and proof. Proof of who would stand by me when they thought I had nothing to offer. That proof had started forming at the housewarming. Each conversation, each look was a kind of ledger entry. And if last night had been any indication, the balance wasn't pretty. I set my coffee down and opened the chest sitting on the workbench. Same chest I'd brought to the party. Inside were envelopes, edges worn soft from my handling, 7 in total. Each bore a name in my handwriting. Each one explained what part they'd play when the truth came out. I pulled the first envelope, the one marked for the teen who helps without asking. I didn't know his name yet, only that he'd helped me carry groceries 2 months ago when the paper bag split in the parking lot. He hadn't asked for a dime. That moment stayed with me. When the co-op opened, he'd get first apprenticeship. Another letter was for the neighbor, the man who'd offered to grab me food last night. I'd written his name before the party instinctively. Kindness like his doesn't wait for cameras. He'd be offered a trustee position at the co-op, not because of education or money, but because he understood what community really meant. Then there were 2 letters with no names. Blank. Those would depend on what happened next. My son, my daughter-in-law. I hadn't decided yet if either would receive one, not because of anger, but because I didn't want guilt to be their only motivation. I closed the chest and ran my hand across the lid. The grain was tight even, no gaps. I'd used reclaimed oak for it, wood that once framed the porch of our old home. When I built it, I could still smell her perfume in the boards. Funny how scent holds longer than promises. The clock on the wall ticked slow. I reached for my phone. No messages. Not from him, not from her. Just one from the co-op's accountant confirming the transfer had gone through. That was the real work. Quiet, steady. The kind that doesn't show up in pictures. I scribbled notes for the next week. File final trust documents with the county. Sign deed transfer for the lake cabin to the land trust. Finalize volunteer list for the winter workshop program. The lake cabin, that one still ached. Built it with my own hands when my wife was pregnant. Every board, every nail. It was meant to be a refuge. My son grew up there, done fishing in summer, skating in winter. Now they saw it as a property line on a spreadsheet. I wanted it to be more. The trust papers for the cabin were clear. It would become a rest retreat for foster families and veterans. Free to use. Free to heal. I leaned back and listened to the silence, the kind of silence that doesn't just sit. It settles. Outside, a pickup truck slowed near my driveway. Someone got out. Through the small window, I saw the neighbor, the same one from last night, carrying a thermos. He waved when he spotted me and called out, "Figured you could use some real coffee." I opened the door. The air was cold enough to see our breath. "Appreciate it," I said. He handed me the thermos. "Rough night?" I smiled. "Not rough, just revealing." He laughed, not sure what I meant, then nodded toward the chest. "That what you were guarding all evening?" "Yeah," I said softly. "It's part of a promise." He didn't press. That's the thing about people who understand silence. They don't rush it. When he left, I sat again at the bench, unscrewed the thermos lid, and let the smell of good coffee fill the trailer. Sawdust floated in the sunlight like dust motes in a church. My hands itched to work. I reached for a plank of cedar, clamped it down, and began to plane. The rhythm steadied my breathing. Scrape, pause, breathe. Every stroke pulled the world back into order. By the time I stopped, the board was smooth, glowing faintly from the friction. I thought of my son, his perfect home, the pride in his voice when he'd said we did it on our own. Maybe he believed that. Maybe he needed to. But the truth, the real truth, was waiting in this chest, in the hands of a man the world thought was broke. When I closed up for the day, I locked the chest and slid it under the bench. Tomorrow I'd start carving names into small wooden plaques, one for each letter. The act of making always steadied me. Creation was my language of forgiveness. And soon, when the time came to open the chest again, I'd let the wood speak for me. The following Saturday, I found myself standing outside the hardware store downtown, the one with the faded red awning and the bell that never stopped ringing above the door. I'd come to pick up a new plane blade, but the errand was really just an excuse to see people. You learn at my age that solitude can start as peace and end as erosion. The cashier, a young man with a ponytail and a nervous energy, rang me up with a grin. "You still making stuff out there, Mr. Carlos?" "Trying to," I said, Old habits die slower than the body. He laughed politely, unsure if it was safe to laugh at something that close to truth. As I stepped outside, I spotted a familiar car pulling up to the curb. Shiny, black, the kind that whispers rather than roars. My son stepped out, sunglasses on, jacket still creased from the dry cleaners. He looked tired, or maybe just hollow. Success has a way of polishing the surface while hollowing the core. "Dad," he said, adjusting his cufflinks, "thought I might catch you here. You're hard to pin down." "I don't move fast, but I don't hide either." He chuckled softly. "You're a mystery, you know that?" That word, mystery, sounded too fancy for me, but I let it slide. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "A little help," he said, "for groceries, just in case." I looked at the envelope, then at him. His eyes darted away. Guilt, pride, fear. They were all in there, fighting for position. "I appreciate it," I said, taking the envelope. "But tell me something. Do you feel better giving it or worse thinking you have to?" He didn't answer. We stood there in the bright, cold morning, both squinting into the sunlight like it might reveal something. He cleared his throat. "Listen, about last week, she didn't mean to sit you by the mudroom. We had to balance the tables for photos. You know how these things go." "Sure," I said. "Symmetry's important." He smiled faintly, realizing I hadn't let that go. After a pause, he said, "You're still good on the trailer rent?" "Paid through the year." "Good. If you ever need anything, I'll ask," I interrupted gently. "You've got a full plate already." That seemed to relieve him, though he didn't understand why. He nodded, said something about heading to a client meeting, and left with a quick wave. I stood there a while longer, feeling the envelope in my hand. Then I opened it. $200 in crisp bills. Clean money untouched by understanding. I folded it once, tucked it back, and walked toward the park. The park had changed since my youth. New benches, new signs about recycling, but the same old oak tree still spread its branches near the pond. I sat there, letting the air hum around me. A boy I'd seen before, the same one who'd helped me with groceries months ago, Mokut, was tossing breadcrumbs to ducks. He saw me and waved. "Hey, mister, you back in town?" "Never left," I said, "just quieter now." He laughed, walked over, and sat beside me without asking. I liked that. People who don't need an invitation to share a silence are rare. "You build stuff, right?" he asked. "I used to." "Like houses?" "Sometimes. Mostly memories now." He blinked, confused but curious. "You still got that chest you brought to the party?" "My dad said it looked old." "It's old," I said. "Older than some mistakes, younger than others." He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. Kids sometimes see clearer than adults who've forgotten how to look. When he left, I sat there watching the water shift with the wind. Each ripple caught a bit of light and carried it forward. Small, quiet motion, unstoppable. That's how truth works, I thought. It doesn't shout, it seeps. Later that afternoon, the phone buzzed. My daughter-in-law. Her tone was syrupy. "Carlos, we're hosting a dinner tomorrow, just family. Thought you might come early and help with the grill? You know, keep things casual." Her voice carried that brightness people use when they're performing kindness. "Sure," I said. "What time?" 6. "Oh, and if you could wear something simple. We're going for a rustic look." "Rustic," I repeated. "I think I've got that covered." She laughed, missing the weight in my tone. The next evening, I arrived at their place with a bottle of lemonade and a bag of fresh bread from the bakery. My son met me at the door, his face strained but smiling. "Glad you could make it, Dad." Inside, the kitchen was a flurry of motion, candles, platters, music playing low. My daughter-in-law greeted me with a peck on the cheek. Perfect timing. We're just setting the plates. I looked at the table, porcelain gleaming white, every place meticulously arranged. 12 seats. Where do you want me? I asked. She hesitated. Oh, actually, maybe by the counter. It'll be easier to serve from there. I nodded. Of course. A stack of paper plates waited near the sink. I took one. She caught my glance, bit her lip, and said, "We ran out of matching ones and I figured you wouldn't mind. You're practical." "I am," I said. "Always have been." Dinner started. Laughter, chatter, wine pouring like confidence. I ate slow, careful not to stain the countertop I wasn't supposed to touch. My son gave a toast about family and gratitude. Everyone clinked glasses except me. Mine was plastic, half full of lemonade. At one point, a guest complimented the kitchen design. My son said, "Yeah, I wanted a craftsman feel. You know, hand-built aesthetic." Hand-built. I almost smiled. I'd built his first crib with those same hands. But I kept quiet. The paper plate felt lighter with each bite, like it might tear under the weight of silence. When the meal ended, my daughter-in-law started collecting dishes. "Don't worry, Carlos," she said. "We've got it." I stood anyway. "I know," I said. "Just wanted to see how porcelain sounds when it clinks together." She paused, eyes flickering. "You okay?" "Better than I look," I said. Later that night, after they'd all gone to the living room, I walked to the porch for air. The stars were faint, washed by suburban glow. I took the envelope from my pocket, the $200, and slipped it under their welcome mat. Then I set a small piece of wood beside it. A smooth hand-sanded cedar tile engraved with a single word, balance. As I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the glass door. Old man, paper plate crumbs on his sleeve, eyes still steady. Inside they laughed again. The kind of laughter that belongs to people sure of their place in the room. I smiled once, softly, and whispered into the cold air. Every room has its beams. The house didn't hear me, but the wood might have. Tomorrow I'd go back to the trailer and finish carving the rest of the plaques. The time for waiting was almost over. Soon the chest would open, and with it everything they'd forgotten how to see. It's strange how quickly a house can forget who built it. By the time I stepped through their front door again 2 weeks later, it was already a museum of fingerprints that weren't mine. The housewarming photos had been framed, hung perfectly along the staircase wall, every smile curated, every frame level. The kind of straightness that demands supervision. They were hosting again. A smaller gathering this time, meant for networking, my son had said. He'd called it a tour, as if showing off a blueprint could explain belonging. I came because he asked, and because I wanted to see if anything had changed since the night of the paper plates. When I arrived, my son was in the foyer, adjusting his cufflinks, the same ones he'd worn at the hardware store. He smiled too quickly. "Dad, you made it. We're doing a walkthrough for a few partners. Just stay comfortable, yeah?" "Comfortable," I repeated. "I'll do my best." He didn't hear the weight in my voice. My daughter-in-law swept in a moment later, bright as ever, holding a glass of something sparkling. "Carlos, glad you could come. We're starting the tour in 5. Maybe stay downstairs? Less walking for you." I nodded. I was used to being stationed like furniture now, moved only for convenience. They began in the living room. A group of strangers followed, murmuring admiration at the molding, the lighting, the imported rug. I listened from the hallway. My son's voice carried confidence, practiced and smooth. "This space was inspired by modern craftsman design," he said. "We wanted clean lines, warmth, but with restraint." The irony almost made me laugh. He moved the group into the kitchen next. "We worked with a designer out of Seattle. he continued, gesturing toward the open shelving. She really helped us capture that handcrafted look. The shelving. My eyes lingered on the grain. I knew that wood. I'd cut it myself 20 years ago, back when I built their first home. The one they sold without telling me. The knots, the subtle curve near the corner, unmistakable. They'd reused my boards, repurposed the past for display. I reached out, touched the underside of a shelf. My thumb found the old pencil mark, a faint line where I'd measured the notch. Still there, under the new stain. The past doesn't vanish, it just hides under new polish. As the tour moved upstairs, I followed at a distance. My knees protested each step, but pride can be a powerful anesthetic. At the top, my son gestured toward the hall. "This is my office," he said, and opened the door. I stopped at the threshold. On the far wall hung one of my old blueprints, framed, centered, the layout of the lake cabin. My signature still visible in the corner. My daughter-in-law caught my glance and said, "We found that in your old workshop when we helped you move. Thought it fit the aesthetic." "The aesthetic," I said quietly. "Yeah, fits just right." They moved on before the silence grew roots. In that moment, something in me shifted. Not anger exactly, but clarity. I understood finally the pattern. Everything that came from my hands had become their decoration, not their inheritance. When the group descended the stairs, I stayed behind. The hall emptied, voices fading toward the living room. I stepped into the office, closing the door softly behind me. The room smelled of new carpet and ambition. The desk gleamed. The chair still had that store-bought leather sheen. I walked to the bookshelf, another piece I recognized. Maple solid frame. I ran a hand along the edge until I found the small gap where the back panel didn't sit flush. From my coat pocket, I pulled a small envelope, plain, unmarked. I slid it behind the panel, pressing it deep until it vanished. Inside that envelope was a list, names of every person who'd shown me kindness these past months. The neighbor, the boy, even the cashier at the hardware store who'd saved me a discount card. Just in case. It wasn't a will, not exactly. More of a record, proof that I'd seen who they were. The door creaked behind me. My son stood there. "Everything okay, Dad?" "Everything's in its place," I said. He smiled, not hearing the meaning. "Good. We're heading out back for the last stop. You coming?" "I'll be there," I said. Downstairs, they showed the guests the backyard deck, the landscaped garden, the smart irrigation system that adjusted itself to weather forecasts. Applause followed every explanation, polite and practiced. When it was over and the crowd began to thin, my daughter-in-law joined me near the back door. "You holding up okay?" she asked. "I am." She hesitated, then added, "I know sometimes it's hard, being in smaller spaces after having a house like yours. But you seem peaceful." I smiled. "Peace is quieter when you've earned it." Her brow furrowed, unsure if it was a compliment or warning. Before she could answer, a car pulled up in the drive. The neighbor stepped out carrying a tray covered with foil. "Hope I'm not late," he said. "Heard there was food." My son waved him in, grateful for the distraction. I watched the two of them shake hands. The contrast struck me. One man with a gold watch and manicured nails, the other with oil stains and soil under his fingers. Both thought they understood value, only one actually did. As the evening wore down, I found myself again in the quiet of the mudroom, same chair as before. Only now the folded chest sat beside me once more, heavier than ever, not from weight, but from decision. Through the open doorway, I could see my son laughing, unaware that the blueprint hanging upstairs carried a note now hidden behind the bookshelf. A note that began with, For the ones who remembered the maker, not the material. The lights in the house gleamed too bright, like they were fighting the dark instead of embracing it. I realized that's what the next chapter of my life had to be. Not fighting darkness, but teaching others how to see through it. I rose slowly, bones stiff, joints protesting. My son called from the kitchen. "You heading out, Dad?" "Yeah," I said. "Got some work waiting for me." He nodded, distracted, already turning back to conversation. Outside, the night air bit my face clean. I walked to my truck, chest tucked under my arm. The moonlight caught the grain just right, and for a moment it looked almost alive. When I reached the truck door, I looked back once. The house glowed like a showroom, beautiful, precise, hollow. I whispered to myself, "They don't know it yet." But the foundation's already shifting. And with that, I drove away, the tires crunching softly over gravel, heading toward the quiet place where sawdust still meant something. The night of the reveal came not with thunder, but with quiet certainty. The way winter steps in and you only notice when your breath turns to smoke. It was their anniversary dinner. My son and daughter-in-law's third. A year since the housewarming, 6 months since the tour, and 2 months since my last invitation. When the call came that morning, her voice bright, rehearsed, I already knew what kind of evening it would be. "Carlos," she'd said, "we'd love for you to join us tonight. Just family and a few close friends. It'll mean a lot to him." A pause, then softer. "It'll mean a lot to me too." I didn't believe the second part, but I didn't need to. I told her I'd come. By dusk, the sky had settled into that pale amber color that makes everything look half frozen in time. I loaded the wooden chest into the truck bed, wrapped in an old quilt. It wasn't heavy anymore. Not since I'd made peace with what was inside. The drive to their house was long enough for memory to loosen its grip. By the time I pulled into their perfect driveway, the lights were already glowing through the windows like they were guarding secrets. He met me at the door, my son. Tie slightly loosened, hair immaculate. "Glad you made it, Dad." "Wouldn't miss it," I said. His hand rested awkwardly on my shoulder. "I know things have been weird, but tonight's a new start," I smiled. "New starts are built on old lessons." He didn't quite follow, but he nodded anyway. Inside, the dining room shimmered crystal glasses, porcelain plates, candles that smelled faintly of citrus and cedar. She was there, my daughter-in-law, dressed like success itself, hosting with precision. Her eyes flicked to the chest in my hands. "Still carrying that thing?" she said with a laugh too quick to be kind. "Always," I said. "Some things are worth keeping close." She didn't press further. They'd gathered maybe 20 people. Colleagues, neighbors, friends from their new church group. Everyone looked at home, like they'd rehearsed being impressed. Dinner passed in waves of conversation that never touched anything real. My son talked about contracts, new clients, market trends. She talked about social events, sponsorships, and the charity gala next month. I ate slow, quiet, watching the clock. When the dessert plates were cleared, my daughter-in-law rose with her glass. "I'd like to propose a toast," she said. "To us, to love that lasts, and to the blessings we build." Polite applause followed. She smiled toward me. "And to my father-in-law for teaching us what resilience looks like." The room turned to me. I could feel the heat of their eyes. I stood slowly, letting the silence settle. My chair scraped against the polished floor, a small sound but sharp. "Resilience," I said. "That's a good word." She nodded, unsure where this was going. I placed the chest on the table. The candles flickered against the oak grain. "You know," I continued, "wood has a kind of memory. It bends, it cracks, it carries scars. but it also remembers the hands that shaped it. A soft murmur passed through the room. My son shifted uneasy. "Dad, it won't take long," I said gently. "I've been holding something for a while, something I think belongs to everyone here, not for what it's worth, but for what it means." I untied the twine, lifted the lid. Inside, 7 envelopes, each marked in my careful handwriting. Between them, a small brass key and a folded shop rag. "This," I said, holding up the key, "opens the front door of the old feed store on Main Street. Some of you might have seen the new sign that went up last week. The Maker's Table Co-op. That's where my tools live now. And soon it'll be where a few others will learn to use theirs." The room was silent, the kind of silence that thickens the air. I reached for the first envelope. "This one's for the boy who helped an old man in a parking lot when no one else did." He looked startled when I stepped toward him. "You'll be the first apprentice," I said. "Learn the trade, then teach it forward." The next was for the neighbor. Kind eyes, calloused hands. "You'll help run the co-op," I said. "Not because of money, but because you already understand community." My daughter-in-law's smile had frozen brittle and bright. My son looked pale. I placed the third envelope in front of a woman across the table. "For the one who brought soup when she thought no one noticed," I said. "You'll manage the volunteer kitchen at the co-op." Then I lifted the shop rag. "This belonged to her," I said softly. "My wife. She used to wipe varnish from the projects I ruined. She believed in making things better, not throwing them away." My voice caught, but I let the pause breathe. Finally, I looked at my son and daughter-in-law. "There are 2 letters left," I said. "One for each of you, but they aren't here." Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "They're at the cabin," I said. "Or what used to be the cabin. It's part of the town land trust now, a place for foster families and veterans to rest. Your names are on the dedication plaque, not as owners, but as caretakers." The air in the room shifted. Someone gasped softly. My son blinked, stunned. "You gave it away?" "I passed it on," I said. "A home's value isn't in who keeps the keys. It's in who finds peace inside." She whispered, "That was worth hundreds of thousands." I raised a hand, gentle but firm. "And yet, it couldn't buy an honest plate at dinner, could it?" A few guests turned away, uncomfortable. The truth tends to ruin polite company. I looked at my son again. "You've done well for yourself. You built something that looks perfect. But I want you to remember, symmetry isn't the same as balance." He stared at the chest, eyes wet but unshed. "Dad," he said quietly, "why didn't you just tell us?" "Because you needed to show me who you were when you thought I had nothing left." The candles flickered again. Outside, wind rattled the window pane. I closed the lid of the chest. "The trust is filed. The co-op opens Monday. You're both welcome there anytime, not as heirs, but as helpers." She stood suddenly, face flushed. "You humiliated us," she hissed under her breath. "No," I said softly. "I reminded you." I turned to leave, the chest under my arm once more. At the door I paused, looked back at my son. "There's still time to learn," I said, "but you'll have to get your hands dirty." The door closed behind me with the sound of old hinges. Slow, tired, honest. Outside, the cold met me like an old friend. The night smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. I walked to the truck, set the chest in the passenger seat, and whispered into the quiet, "That's the last time I'll need to carry you." Then I drove home under a sky thick with stars, each one a nail holding the dark together. The morning after the dinner, the sun came late. It rose behind a gray film of clouds, like it too wasn't sure if the world deserved to be seen so clearly yet. I woke early anyway. Old men do that. Our bodies become clocks that don't need alarms. The trailer was cold, the kind of cold that presses close before the heater wakes. I wrapped my hands around a mug of coffee and watched steam blur the reflection of my face in the window. The night before still sat in me like unfinished work. The phone rang once around 8, my son's name on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "Dad," he said, voice low, careful. "Can we talk?" "Of course," I said. "You sound tired." "I didn't sleep much." "Neither did I." He exhaled long and heavy. "We didn't mean to make you feel small." "I know," I said. "You meant to make yourselves look big. Sometimes those feel the same." He didn't argue. That silence, his silence, was new. After a moment, he asked, "Can I come by?" "You can," I said, "but come ready to work. I've got boards that need planing." He laughed softly, almost in relief. "Yeah, all right, I'll bring gloves." He arrived just before noon. No jacket, no entourage of words. The trailer looked even smaller with him standing inside it. He glanced around, the old stove, the sagging couch, the workbench lined with tools that had outlived better men. "You really live like this?" he said quietly. "It's honest," I said. "Nothing here pretends to be something it's not." He nodded. "I think I forgot what that feels like." I handed him a pair of gloves and a cedar plank. "Then let's remind you." We worked in near silence for a while. The rhythm of sanding filled the space, steady and grounding. The sound of two men trying to rebuild something without saying what it was. After an hour, he set down the sander. "She's furious," he said. "Your wife?" He nodded. "Says you embarrassed us in front of everyone, that it was cruel." "Was it?" I asked. "I don't know," he said. "Maybe we deserved it. Maybe not like that." I wiped sawdust from the bench. "You didn't deserve cruelty, but you needed truth. Sometimes truth comes wrapped in noise." He leaned against the wall, arms folded. "When you said the cabin was gone, it felt like losing her all over again." My breath caught. "Your mother?" He nodded. "I used to think that place was her. The way it smelled, the way the floor creaked near the window. I guess I thought it meant she was still around." "She is," I said softly, "just not in walls anymore. She's in how you remember to care for things." He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "I didn't care for you much, did I?" I didn't answer. He didn't wait for one. We were proud of what we built, the house, the life. We wanted you to see we'd made it. I guess we thought you'd be proud too. "I was," I said, "until you started mistaking polish for purpose." He nodded again. "Yeah, I did that." Outside, wind moved through the trees, carrying a faint smell of rain. I poured him a cup of coffee and handed it over. He took it with both hands, as if afraid it might spill some unseen grace. He said, "You really gave it all away?" "Not away," I said. "Just forward. To the people who still remember what it means to build with your hands, not just your image." He looked down, turning the cup slowly. "So what happens now?" "You start where you left off," I said. "There's still work at the co-op if you want it. The first group of kids comes next week. They'll need someone patient." He smiled faintly. "I'm not sure I qualify." "Patience grows like callus," I said. "You get it by wearing through yourself a bit." We went back to work. The sound of sandpaper filled the room again. After a while, he spoke without looking up. "She says she's not coming back here." "Your wife?" He nodded. "She's staying at her sister's for now. Says she needs time to rethink our direction." "Give her that," I said. "People who live for appearance need silence to see themselves." He nodded slowly. "Do you think she'll come around?" "I don't know," I said. "But if she does, it has to be because she wants truth, not furniture." He laughed quietly through his nose. You always were poetic when you were mad. Madness keeps the metaphors alive, I said. And he actually smiled, not the practiced kind, but small, real. When the work was done, the boards lay smooth and ready. He wiped his hands on a rag and looked at me. You really think I can fix this? I met his eyes. You can fix anything you built wrong. You just have to stop pretending it was right. He left that afternoon with sawdust in his hair and something new in his eyes. Humility, maybe. Or maybe just the start of understanding. After he drove off, I stood outside the trailer watching dust swirl up from the gravel road. The sun was low, gold leaking across the horizon. The neighbor came walking up with a box of screws. He came by, huh? He did, I said. How'd it go? Like sanding oak, I said. Rough at first, smoother by the end. He grinned. You got away with words, Carlos. Just time, I said, and a long ledger to balance. He helped me stack the boards against the wall. When he left, the air was quiet again. I stood in the doorway of the trailer and looked at the workbench. The chest still sitting there, open now, the letters gone, only sawdust left inside. That felt right. Not everything sacred needs keeping. Some things finish their purpose by being emptied. That night, before bed, I sat with my journal, an old notebook bound in cracked leather, and wrote a single line at the top of the page. Care is the only currency that gains interest when spent. Then I closed it, turned off the light, and listened to the crickets sing their unpolished truth into the dark. Spring came late that year. It crept in quietly, soft-footed, hesitant, as if the earth itself wasn't sure it was allowed to start over. But it did, in its own time. By April, the co-op on Main Street was alive with the sound of hammers and laughter. The old feed store smelled of pine and possibility. The sign above the entrance, the maker's table, still looked too new for its age, but that would change soon. Paint fades faster than purpose. I was there early every morning, unlocking the door just as the first light hit the windows. The brass key always turned smooth in my hand. I'd built that lock myself. Not to keep people out, but to know who cared enough to arrive on time. The first few weeks it was just me and the neighbor, patching drywall, sanding benches, wiring lights. Then the others came. The boy from the park, 3 students from the vocational school, a retired mechanic who'd heard about it from church. We didn't advertise. Word travels fine on its own when it's carried by good work. Each person brought something different, a skill, a story, a scar. Together we made sawdust and sense in equal measure. One afternoon, as I was fitting a new door onto the back of the shop, a truck pulled into the lot. I knew that sound. Cautious tires on gravel. My son stepped out. No jacket this time, no cufflinks, just jeans, boots, and a plain flannel shirt, the kind that once belonged to his childhood. He walked up slow, hands empty. Need another pair of hands? He asked. Always, I said. Grab the level. He smiled, small, honest. We worked side by side for a while, measuring twice, cutting once, saying little. The silence between us felt different now, not avoidance, but agreement. The language of people who've stopped trying to win and started trying to understand. After we hung the door, he stepped back to admire it. Looks good, he said. It'll swell in the rain, I said. Everything does at first. He chuckled. You've always got a proverb for everything. Proverbs are just mistakes that got patient, I said. He nodded, running a hand over the frame. Mom would have liked this place. She's here, I said. Every time someone learns to fix instead of throw away. He turned to me, eyes steady. I read the letter, he said. The one you left at the cabin. I waited. You wrote, love is proof of work done twice. Once for the world, once for yourself. I remember, I said. He swallowed hard. I think I finally understand it. We stood there a while, letting the quiet breathe between us. Eventually, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. A key. Old brass, familiar. I found this in the drawer at home, he said. Didn't know if you needed it back. I looked at it. That's not for a door anymore, I said. That's for you. He frowned. What's it open? Whatever you decide to build next. He stared at it a long moment, then smiled. I'll hold on to it. Good, I said. Keys are like promises. They only work when you keep them close. The boy from the park came running up then, carrying a half-built birdhouse. Mr. Carlos, he said, does this look straight? Bring it here, I said. He held it up proudly. The nails weren't perfect, the edges uneven, but it had heart. Looks straight enough for the sky, I said. He grinned and ran off again. My son watched him go. You really did it, he said quietly. You built something bigger than a house. Not bigger, I said. Just truer. He nodded. Can I come by again tomorrow, maybe help with the benches? I'll be here, I said. Same time. As he turned to leave, he hesitated. Dad? Yeah? Thanks. For not giving up on me. I smiled. That's not something fathers are allowed to do. He left then, and I stood at the doorway watching him drive away. Slow, steady, no. Hurry this time. The new door swung gently in the breeze, creaking like an old song finding its rhythm again. Later that evening, when everyone had gone, I sat alone in the shop. The light came low through the windows, landing on the tools arranged neatly on the pegboard. Each one had a place. Each one had a purpose. I thought about the ledger I used to keep. All those names, all those notes about kindness and absence. I didn't need it anymore. The balance had been settled in a different way. I closed my eyes and listened to the silence. It wasn't empty now. It was full. Full of hammer strokes still echoing, of laughter caught in rafters, of sawdust settling like soft rain on the floor. The kind of silence you can build on. I walked to the bench, ran my fingers over the smooth wood and whispered, "We did all right, love. The work's still going." Then I turned off the light, locked the door, and hung the key on a small hook by the entrance. The same one my son would use in the morning. Outside, the night air was cool and kind. The sign creaked above me, swinging gently as if nodding in approval. I looked up once at the stars, those quiet nails in the sky, and smiled. Some doors you build to keep the world out. Others, you build so someone can find their way back in. And this one, I thought, is wide open. Before you go, if this story stayed with you, even just a little, take a moment to hit that like button. It helps more than you know. And in the comments, tell me, what part of Carlos's journey spoke to you the most? Was it the silence, the forgiveness, or the door he built in the end?